This is the Homestead Journey Podcast, the podcast dedicated to the pursuit of self-sufficiency, self-reliance, and sustainability. This is episode number 61 of the Homestead Journey Podcast. Welcome, welcome, welcome. If you are a new subscriber, I am so glad that you found the show. And if you are a longtime listener, thank you so much for your support as we journey together towards self-sufficiency, self-reliance, and sustainability. My name is Brian Wells. I am coming to you from 3B Farm and Homestead here in beautiful upstate New York. And folks, can you do me a favor and let's pray for some snow? We desperately need some snow here in beautiful upstate New York. Of course, we need it for the beautiful white Christmas that we all dream of. But I'm also a snowboard instructor. During the winter months, my son is a ski instructor at a local ski area, and we need some snow. It has not been cold enough for them to even start making snow at the ski area where we work. And so do me a favor, cross your fingers, cross your toes, I don't know, do a little snow dance, whatever we need to do so that we can have some snow here in beautiful upstate New York. I really would appreciate it. Okay, having said all of that nonsense, let's jump right into this week's homestead happenings, and I will bring you up to speed with what we've been doing here on 3B Farm and Homestead. So this week, well, we unfortunately had a couple more jailbreaks with Boris and his girlfriend Basil. They got out twice this week. Now, the first time I was actually at work and my wife came home and she happened to see a pig running up and down the outside of the fence next to where Bear, our original boar, and his two girlfriends are. And she initially thought that one of them had escaped, and so she opened up the gate and that pig trotted right in, and then she realized, oh no, there are 4 pigs in this paddock and there really only should be 3. And then she realized who it was when Bear came over and started pushing Boris around. Now, thankfully, she was able to carefully separate them without getting injured herself. She got Boris off into a temporary holding area. And then when I got home, well, I realized there was an extra pig there. And thankfully, he has really adapted well to following those buckets. And right up the hill and into his paddock he went, no problem whatsoever. My wife also that day discovered that Basil, she had got Boris in and then got him separated, and then she had to go pick our son up from school. And so when she got home, she realized there was another pig out. And sure enough, it was Basil. She had lifted up those hog panels, and there she was trotting around. So she was able to get her back where she belongs, and then I was able to get Boris back. And I worked on trying to get that fence tightened up, those hog panels really tightened up to those T-posts, and I thought I had everything secured really well. And then on Thursday, I was working from home, and mid-morning, my wife said, oh no, the pigs are out again. And sure enough, I went out, and there was both Boris and Basil out trotting around the yard again. And again, I went and got buckets and some food and right back down over the hill to their pen they went. And this time, I don't know, knock on wood, maybe we'll do a little bit of that. I think I've gotten that hog panel secured properly. If this does not work, I have made up my mind. What I'm going to do is run a jumper. I've got to go get a few temporary step-in posts, but I'm going to run a jumper and get a hot wire over to the inside of that pen and just put some electric fencing there and keep them where they belong. This is, I probably should have done that like after the first time they escaped, but I guess I'm not just smart enough. I don't know. I guess I like chasing pigs around. Who knows? But that is the plan. Hopefully they will stay where they're supposed to be. I've got it tightened down enough, and we'll see. But if not, plan B is to run that jumper and get that area electrified. This week, we also were able to pick up our pork. As you remember, a couple of weeks ago, we dropped off some pigs to the processor. And so this week, I got the phone call that everything was ready for pickup. And that's just always such an exciting time. So I got that in the freezer. So far, the only thing we've enjoyed has been some sausage. Last night, my wife made it was just absolutely delicious. Waffles with some fruit. And then we had some of our farm fresh eggs with some of that sausage. And it was just absolutely amazing. My customers picked up all of their pork this week. And actually, my mom and dad, who bought a pig from me, they so far have had 2 meals. They had some of the smoked pork chops, and today they did some barbecued ribs, and they are just raving about the quality. And maybe it's just my mom and dad being nice to me. I don't know. But I'd like to think that I have provided them a great quality product and that they are absolutely enjoying it. I also had a customer, it's the first time this individual has purchased pork from me, who came all the way up from New York City. And it was just really great to meet him in person and meet his daughter. His 14-year-old daughter came up with him. And it's always very satisfying and fulfilling when you are talking to a customer and you know that you are providing them with a really high quality product and they appreciate it. And they appreciate the work and the care that went into it. They stopped by, they saw the pigs, they were so excited about that. And so I hope that this really is the beginnings of a great relationship with them. They have offered to show us around New York City when we're down that way. And so I will certainly be taking them up on that offer as I look for some great food in New York City. New York City is one of those places I always enjoy visiting, but I can't wait to get the heck out of there. It's actually been a number of years since we've visited down to the city. And so once this whole COVID thing is over and put to bed, I wouldn't mind going down there, taking them up on their offer and getting to see the city from their perspective. But anyhow, it was very, very exciting to meet them. And I hope the rest of my customers were friends and family. And so excited to hear what they have to say, because this is the first time any of them have purchased pork from me. So very excited to hear their feedback. But that took place this week. And so it's just always an exciting time for us. This week, the seed catalogs continue to roll on in, and so we'll be sitting down and going through them and starting to dream and scheme and think about the garden for next year and really apply those notes that I jotted down during this past garden season and at the end of the garden season as I was kind of evaluating the varieties that worked well for us and the varieties that didn't work so well for us. And so I'm just really excited about diving into those seed catalogs on some cold winter nights with maybe a mug of hot chocolate seated by the pellet stove and dreaming about getting my fingers in dirt once again. That's what's been going on here on 3B Farm and Homestead. I hope things find you well as you are preparing for the Christmas holidays, or if you celebrate Hanukkah, whatever it is that you celebrate, I hope things are going well for you wherever you might be. Before we jump on into this week's Charting the Course, I did want to ask you to do me a couple of favors. First of all, if you haven't already, could you jump on over to iTunes or your favorite podcast platform and leave me a review, a rating, a thumbs up, whatever it allows for, and that way it will help other people find the show. And then if you could also share the show with other people, I would really appreciate it. If there's maybe somebody that reaches out to you or you see a question asked on a Facebook group and it's something that I've answered and you think maybe somebody might gain some insight and information and some help from an episode that I've put out, I'd really appreciate it if you would share those with your friends, family, maybe even your enemies. If there's somebody that you really want to get on their nerves, send me their way. Who knows? Maybe we'll turn them into a homesteader yet. If you would like to support the show, you can also do so by going on over to thehomesteadjourney.net/shop. At that link, you will find a link to our t-shirt shop. And I did finally get those new designs up there this week. In fact, I got several of those designs out this week to people who won those t-shirts in last month's contest. So excited to see those start arriving, and hopefully we'll see those on Instagram and Facebook and so forth. Also on that page are a bunch of links to Amazon. These are products that we use here on our homestead that we recommend. And so if you buy through those links, a portion of that does come back to help support the show. Having said that, let's jump right on over to this week's Charting the Course. On this week's Charting the Course, I am so excited to be joined by none other than Troy McClung from the Pastured Pig podcast and the Red ToolHouse YouTube channel. Now, you may remember that a couple of weeks ago, I was featured on the Pastured Pig podcast. I will leave a link to that in the show notes. And it was just so much fun to chat with Troy about pigs on his podcast. And he was kind enough to join me here on the Homestead Journey as we talk about their journey into homesteading in West Virginia. And so I hope you really enjoy this. Troy, it was just a lot of fun to do this interview. And I could have gone on and on and on and on, but we just had to cut it somewhere. It's a little longer than normal, but I think it's absolutely well worth it. So without further ado, Troy, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Brian. I appreciate it.
Wasn't too long ago that you and I shared a conversation. I really appreciate the opportunity of being on the Pastured Pig podcast.
Yes, yeah, that was a good one. I appreciated your input and your discussion.
It was a lot of fun, and one of the things I think you said on there, I can't remember if it was on the lead-in or as you were kind of wrapping things up, is that it kind of felt like we had known each other forever. So, and I felt the exact same way.
Yeah, it's interesting. The podcast obviously has me talking to a lot of people. My small business has me interacting with a lot of people, and there's some people you just kind of mesh with, and there's others it's a little bit tougher, and you feel like you can't break the ice very well. And then there's some, like I said, with you and just a couple other guys that I've talked to. It's like, man, yeah, it could be brothers from another mother type of situation, because it's really neat how you can hit it off well and really relate to somebody.
It is, and as you and I, after we were done recording the podcast, we really found that there's a number of other areas of interest that we have in common, and it's always interesting as you start talking to people how much we share, I guess. So.
Yeah, I agree.
And so on that podcast, we talked about pastured pigs. Today, we're going to really delve into homesteading. You're a homesteader as well. And so as we kind of get into this, why don't we start by just talking a little bit about your homestead, your family, and all of those kinds of things.
Sure. Yeah. No, we're in central or southern West Virginia. It's funny. Got to back the boat up all the way here to the edge of the shore so everybody can get in. West Virginia is its own state.
Yes.
We're not Western Virginia. So that always confuses people sometimes. So we became a state in 1863. But so we're in South Central West Virginia, which we call the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains. And it's funny, if you wrinkled up a piece of paper and then tried to flatten it back out, that's kind of the topography of our area. It's all these undulating hills and valleys, or what they call in our neck of the woods, we call them hollers. Mm-hmm. So you've got all these small valleys that you can kind of be tucked in. So we're in we have 100 acres, and it is its own little holler. So it's 100 acres. I always say for you golfers, it's a good dog leg right, or it's a tube. If you laid a tube sock down, that's kind of what it looks like, because it's just got a slight bend in it. But it's basically everything that the water, when it rains, water drains into that valley. That's us. Property lines across the top of the ridge all the way around. So we've been here about 20 years. And what's funny is I bought the land. My wife and I lived in Florida for a while. I'm originally from West Virginia. She's not, but we moved to Florida right after college. And when I lived in Orlando for a while and really got tired of just, Orlando was very people-y, had a lot of people in it. so it was a little too much for us. We decided, hey, let's go back to West Virginia. But I said, if we're going to move back, I really want to live out rural. I want to try to acquire some land. And really it was my attitude at the time, because I really didn't like people. I just wanted to be away from people. It wasn't that I wanted to homestead or wanted to farm. I didn't grow up farming. My folks weren't farmers. We lived rural, but we had a garden, that type of thing, but we didn't do any homesteading-esque type stuff. Did a lot of camping, did a lot of stuff out in the woods. So when we came up here, it took a year for me to find the place. And I think that's maybe, if anybody listening has thought, okay, this guy kind of sounds familiar, I'm not sure, probably the one thing, if there's ever any YouTube claim to fame for us, it would be the video we did about how we got our land. I ended up getting it for $250 an acre net because of some timber sales and just a great deal. The land was trashed, all those type of things. So we came back and we spent a year trying to find land, try to find it rural, trying to find something that was a fixer-upper. Found this land, and probably for about the first 10 years, I was just one of those dumb young kids. I was in my mid to late 20s, one of those dumb kids that thought, you buy land, you and your wife work, you try to amass all this wealth as much as possible, and you turn all that into debt. And it's debt, 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 debt. And so we did that. We built a house. I built too big of a house for what I really needed to do. And then when my son was born 7 years later, my first son was born 7 years later, I'm like, oh, this is a game changer. It really it was kind of a wake up call for me for a lot of things, financially, physically, spiritually. And I realized I need to get my act together and kind of get back on track with some things. My wife wanted to stay home and raise our son. She didn't want to go back to work, so our income got cut in half. So it was a very interesting time for us. Fortunately, through the grace of God, we were able to stay on our place. I didn't have to give it back to the bank, even though our income got cut in half. Actually, got cut about 60% because she was an accountant. She was making more money than I was. So through that's when we decided, okay, this is one of those things, and you hear this all the time. I know this becomes cliche. So Netflix account, Food Inc., bang, it just hits us. It's like, okay, yeah, we've got all this land, we've got this interest. We gotta do something about this. We want our child to eat healthier than we do, and that's what started the downward spiral there.
Gotcha. So that was about 10 years ago, then, is what you said?
Yeah. So I bought the land in 2000. We moved into our house in 2002. It took me 2 years to build it. I built it. I guess I did my own contracting work on it, but it was probably 2010, 2009, 2010 is when we decided we were going to do what's now called modern homesteading. We're going to try to be as self-reliant and try to produce as much of our food as possible, and of course know where it came from. If we weren't going to be able to produce it ourselves, at least buy it from local farms or local people that we knew grew it in more responsible manners. Excellent.
Now, as you said, you did not grow up as a homesteader or on a farm. Did Kelly?
No. Kelly she was the cliche city girl. She grew up in a place called Deerfield Beach, Florida, which is pretty much Fort Lauderdale. So as a young child, she was there. Her folks ended up, they bounced around a bit, but they ended up in West Virginia out of just really a job situation for her dad, and things had kind of turned bad. So they ended up staying in a family's house in West Virginia. So they had a lot of culture shock. But I met Kelly actually in, I think I first met her in 9th grade in what was then called junior high. Mm-hmm. And then we started dating in high school, and of course dated all through college and got married after college. But no, she was not a country girl. In fact, I think I may tell it in a video, when I convinced her that this is the land we wanted to buy, brought her out, showed her. Fortunately, there was about 4 inches of snow on the ground, so she couldn't see what these large mounds were. They were mounds of garbage piled up. And she just thought maybe they were brush or weeds or whatever, because they were covered in snow. And when we closed on the land and it was official that we owned it, and I said, yes, let's move out there, she cried for a while. She was very melancholy for several days. But I told her, I said, just trust me. I'll make it cozy. I'll make it comfortable. And I think you'll like it. And now, it didn't take her 20 years to get to that point, but now she absolutely loves it. She wouldn't trade it for anything.
That's awesome. And I've definitely, you know, as I've watched your videos and whatnot, I've seen that the pictures of what it looked like versus what it is now. Definitely, if people aren't familiar with the YouTube channel, I would definitely recommend you pop over there and check that out, because it certainly is an amazing transformation. That is for sure.
Well, thank you. It still has a lot of work to do. It's funny with, again, if you're not familiar with West Virginia haulers, you may not appreciate it as well, but unfortunately, the previous owners, generationally, it's not just one set of owners. It was just the entire generation. It's about 3 generations of the same family that lived there. It was just the attitude then. So it wasn't that I'm singling them out. It was in fact, most of us did this 2-3 generations ago in West Virginia. You didn't have trash service.
Right.
So whenever you expended things that wouldn't burn or things that you couldn't repurpose, you simply took them up on a hill or took them up to a watershed or a smaller hollow and you dumped them in it. And unfortunately, these people really claim that. And so we've spent, when we first bought the place, we had these huge rollback dumpsters come in. I think I took 3, 4, 5, I don't remember. It was very, very expensive. I just remember putting a lot of money in the waste management's pocket. But it's just funny now, so 20 years later, there's still some places where there's a concentration of stuff that's half buried. I need to get some equipment in to dig it out. But every once in a while, we'll have a heavy rain, frog choker or gully washer is what we call it here in West Virginia. And I'll be cruise along one of my roads there beside our main stream and look, and there's, a washing machine or there's a hot water tank. And it's like, did that fall out of the sky? Because that wasn't there yesterday. and then discover that it just got washed out. It was tucked up under a rock somewhere further up in one of the little canyon valleys. And it's like, holy moly, where did that come from? So if you see the videos, you'll every once in a while you'll still see, when I go up to specific areas, I'll even point it out and say, here's an area that we're trying to work on. And it gets a little frustrating at times because I don't want to spend every weekend loading up a trailer and taking it to the recycling center or taking it to landfill, but it can be daunting.
Now, is there any of it that you had shipped off of the property that once you got into the whole homesteading thing, you kind of wished you had back as maybe material for building?
It's funny. I'm a pack rat by nature, so I think I did a pretty good job gleaning through it. But the funny story is at one point, I think one of the family members, or he and his brother, I've been told by some of the neighbors, decided to try to get into a wrecker service, like a recovery service or a towing service. So there were times where we were cleaning up. Before we even bought the property, we took 220 tires off the property on a day where the local county was doing a tire removal cleanup day. And they're like, hey, bring in your tires. We'll dispose of them. That's kind of this county funded cleanup. And we bring in 2 box trucks full of tires, and it really upset the lady. She thought I was a tire dealer. She's like, you're obviously a business. You've got those. I'm going to follow you back to where you are. I'm like, come on, lady, come look, because you can help us. You can help us load these tires up. So the tires were one thing, and I've had a lot of people, when I commented on my video, a lot of people, oh, you should have saved those tires for earth. You could have made an earth ship. And I said, yeah, I could have. At the time, I had absolutely no idea what an earth ship was, nor was I remotely interested in doing that. So those tires would have had to sit there for 10 plus years, which would not have been good. But the other thing was, a lot of these guys had brought in some old junk cars, and we had at the time Multiflora Rose, which is just I don't know if you guys have that up in New York, but it's just a crazy thorn bush, very, very bright. It's like a wild rose. I think it was imported accidentally or unintentionally, who knows? But it was a hedgerow, I think, in Europe originally.
I'm not familiar with it.
Oh, it's nasty. I mean, it can be, well, the point of the story, we had multiple rose bushes that they get so big that you could hide a vehicle in it. And I actually found that. I'm there with my tractor and my bush hog trying to clean these old areas up. And you back into something, it's like, what in the world was that? And you dig in, and I kid you not, Brian, there was one time that there was a cab of like a 1968 Chevy C10 pickup, and a multiflora rosebush was growing up and through it, and so thick that you couldn't see it in the middle of summer. And I'm like, well, that's interesting. So so finding all this scrap metal, all those things. I had a guy, a scrapper, we call him, a guy coming around to do recycling. And he said, as long as I could bring him all the scrap metal out and put it on a car frame in our front meadow at the front of the property, he'd come haul it away for free because he'd get the scrap out of it. And I'm like, that sounds perfect.
Mm-hmm.
So I think I was able to dig out 4 or 5 full-size car frames, and then just kept piling appliances and anything else that I could find that were that way. But our property also, since we're in the middle of natural gas country, the Pennsylvania to West Virginia is really big in coal and natural gas. So we had, at one time, there's about 8 gas wells on our 100 acres, but they've all since then been capped off. But the gas companies leave behind, there's a lot of 2.5-inch metal pipe laying on the ground, which I use constantly. I use it for fence posts. I built a trough for the pigs out of it. We have that, and then we'll find 6-inch, 8-inch, and 10-inch well casing, which are just basically look like big 10-foot sections of pipe. So we find a lot of that, and I keep that, of course. And every once in a while, I found a drill bit, a real heavy piece of drill steel that was used in the well industry, and somebody had turned it into like what we call a dibble bar or a spud bar. So it's about 6 foot tall and it weighs about 50-60 pounds. It's stout. So I use that all the time. So, and then logging chains. I think I found 15 logging chains.
Wow.
Just you're digging around doing stuff. It's like, hey, here's another logging chain. So I haven't bought a logging chain, I think, in the 20 years I've lived there. So
Nice. Very cool. My my brother actually bought a home off of a guy that was a bit of a pack rat, and a bunch of just random bits and bobs sitting around. And my brother actually about a couple of years ago moved to Tennessee, but before he did, I went over and kind of gleaned, as you said, from there.
Yeah.
And periodically, I'm starting to run out of the Ed Lee specials, but there are a number of things here on the Homestead that are courtesy of Ed Lee. And as you were saying with regards to dumping things in the hollers, let me assure you that is not unique to West Virginia. My grandfather was raised on a farm, basically the next town over, in essence, across the river from where we are at now. And there is still a dump there of things from 70, 80 years ago. So definitely not unique to West Virginia. In fact, one of these days I need to go over there and kind of pick through it and see if I can find anything for the homestead. But we'll keep it stored over there for now until I need it.
There you go. Absolutely.
So you said that, as I understood, it was kind of the movie Food Inc. that kind of started you on your journey towards, we'll call it homesteading.
Yeah. It really was. The catalyst was having a child. Everyone says, hey, your life's going to change when you have a kid. I'm like, nah, it's not. We're not. And then bang, kid comes along, and you're like, oh wow, I'm responsible for this other life now. I gotta take more responsibility. So that was the original catalyst. Was my son Liam coming along, and Kelly really felt she was being led to stay home, to raise him, not go back to work, homeschool, which we ended up doing. We homeschool both of our kids. Liam's now in his first year in college. So we really kind of felt led that way. So it really is a domino effect thing. It's like, okay, if you're going to stay at home, she starts reading things and researching. We had a Netflix account, so we still get DVDs because our internet's so lousy. So we got the DVD Food Inc., watched it, and it was like, wow, okay. We knew it was bad. We didn't realize it was that bad. And so that just started us researching other things. And then, of course, it became, the gateway animal for homesteading was chickens. So we got a couple chickens and realized, hey, I can actually keep these animals alive. I'm not going to let them die like I figured I would. And started doing gardening, those type of things. So it just escalated. And really, I started consuming podcasts like crazy, because at the time, I was self-employed, so I was driving about 45 minutes to my office where my business partner and I have a business. And so I consume a lot of podcasts, and I started listening to Chicken Thistle Farm, which I don't think they're doing anything anymore, but they were in New York, and they raised pigs and chickens and things, but it was their pigs that really intrigued me. and I'm a big fan of bacon. And so I thought, I think I can do that. The way they're describing it, the low infrastructure cost up front, not high tensile wire. You don't have to do all this crazy fencing like you would with cattle and the big equipment you need to do that. So we decided to start with pigs, and that's what we did, and it just kept going from there.
And so then with the pigs, I mean, kind of when I look at your YouTube channel, and for those of you who aren't familiar, and I've said this at the beginning, but you do have a well-known YouTube channel, Red ToolHouse, and then the podcast. Obviously, pigs are a big part of that. I would hazard to guess between pigs and forestry topics, that's a big bulk of what you cover on your YouTube channel, and then obviously on the podcast, and obviously a bunch of other homesteading related things as well. Did you kind of just learn it kind of on the fly, learn by doing?
Yeah, it's crazy, the experience that we've had, and we've had pigs now 6.5 years, I believe. I have to go back and look at my book, but really it was just a series of errors, and that's what I always tell anybody that reaches out and wants to know, hey, what's your advice to this type of stuff? It's like, well, I'm going to tell you how we do things and why we do them, because when we did them a different way, we had mistakes. And I get some heat on the YouTube channel. People say, "Oh, that's the guy that kills his pigs." I've had some total losses with my my farrowings and things just because of either infrastructure or bad genetics. There's all kinds of stuff, and we want to be completely transparent because we're definitely not experts, and we have. I mean, every farm has challenges. We have the unique challenge with topography. We don't have any flat land. I mean, I joke, I've got 100 acres and only have one place where I can turn my truck around with my 16-foot trailer. And that's legitimately, I mean, that is true. That's actually not a joke, I guess, but it's sometimes tough for people to wrap their brain around. But yeah, so the pigs, learning the pigs was just trial and error. Okay, we're going to try this. We want to do artificial insemination, so we tried that with breeding. We did that for a while. Now we have a boar. I actually have 3 boars, but just trying those different things, trying different genetics, trying different pasture setups, trying different rotation schedules, trying different feed mechanisms, whether we do bulk feeding, whether we do daily feeding, whether we soak and ferment, or whether we provide dry. All of those things we have opinions on them because we've tried them, fencing structure styles, those things. And same with the chickens. The chickens to me are, chickens are chickens. And I don't want to, that doesn't oversimplify because it's difficult to raise chickens and keep them going. But pigs have really been my passion. And the simple fact that, excuse me, the land that we have was an old farm. Back in the 60s, about 60% of it was cleared land and what we call West Virginia tillable. But over those years, the people just let it go back. So we're here in the heart of the Appalachian Mountains. So everything goes back to Appalachian hardwood. So when I bought it, out of those 100 acres, there were probably only 5 acres, if even that had any clear space at all. It was all back to forestry. That's why I sold the timber. We did a very specific, very highly managed timber sale. And I talk about that on our channel. And that allowed me to generate a lot of revenue to get a good deal on the land net, but it also allowed me to clear up some land and kind of punch some holes in this hardwood forest. So the pigs help with that. We live on the front portion of our property. Our property is pretty much oriented east-west. So we live on the eastern side of the property, and the west side is as you go further up the valley, up the watershed, there's just a bunch of nothing around. I mean, there's hundreds and hundreds of acres of nothing around us. So we joke that we're the modern frontiersmen, and the pigs, we tell them to head west. So we move them further up the valley so they can help clear out some of this underbrush, help us figure out exactly how we manage it, because we'd like to get to larger animals. We'd love to have cattle at some point, but I just don't have enough cleared land.
Mm-hmm. And you've been focusing quite a bit on silvopasture and kind of working towards that. So I think you're well headed in the right direction there. Now, so obviously you said you didn't have any background in farming. Pigs, you've kind of been learning as you go. You have just an exceptional knowledge when it comes to forestry. Did you have a background in that before you bought the homestead, or has that been something that you've learned?
That's like asking a fat kid, how does he figure out about desserts? and, and I don't mean that to be demeaning, because that was me. I am not educated in forestry, but man, I can remember as a kid, I would just spend every chance I get out in the woods. I just love being out in the woods. Wasn't big into hunting as much. We used to grouse hunt when we were kids, but the coyote population's kind of wiped out the grouse around here. But I just love being out in the woods. So it was one of those deals where in West Virginia, if you're outside, you're in the woods, because that's just the way it is. So learning about the forest, learning about the different species, those type of things. I had a great uncle who was really dear to me. He was a woodworker. My dad was a woodworker, so it just kind of naturally fit. It's like, okay, if you want to do woodworking, you need to be able to identify the woods, and then Mom and Dad always burned firewood, so we were always out in the woods, cutting and splitting firewood. So it just seemed like, if ever there was a playground around the house, it was the woods. So as I got older and, of course, acquired this land, I knew when I set foot on the land, when we were talking to the owners about buying it, I mean, the guy knew he hadn't sold the timber in a long time, so he thought there was some value in it. I definitely looked at him like, wow, there's a lot of timber value here. Had friends, have a lot of friends in the forestry and business. So I really just gleaned a lot of information from them, spent a lot of time, cruised timber sale purchases with them. So I've learned just by kind of tagging along. I wouldn't say it was an apprenticeship, but just kind of more of a morbid curiosity that I'd tag along with these guys. So by doing that, just learned, and then just keep talking to them. I mean, I've got a good buddy, Jeff, who I've had on a couple of videos, who is, and he's a couple years my senior, and he's been a forester all of his life, and he's just a wealth of knowledge. And so I just constantly ask him, it's like, man, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? So that is where I was able to see the timber on the land as something of value, but then also something that needs to be done very responsibly. Mm-hmm. And so what was really neat is we sold the timber 10 years before I was interested in any of the silvopasture or anything like that. But we specifically said we want a select cut. We're not taking anything less than 16-inch diameter. And our forestry person at the time that we used, he went through and inventoried everything. So there was literally a spreadsheet of every single tree that they were allowed to cut. Those trees were marked and identified in the woods. We knew exactly where the roads were going to go. We knew exactly how they were going to do erosion mitigation, all that type of stuff. And so I literally walked with a forester after it was done and counted stumpage. And it's like, okay, we better have, I don't remember the number, but let's say it was 492 stumps. There's 492 stumps. If we see an extra stump, then we get to come back and talk to the timber guys about, hey, you've cut more than you were supposed to. Mm-hmm. And in that situation, they actually left. They didn't cut as much as they purchased because, unfortunately, the timber value was dropping for them. So they actually left early. So I got a little bit more bang out of my buck there because they didn't want to stay and cut. But so what was neat is because of that selective cut, when it was time to look at silvopasture, it just made sense. It's like, wow, I've already generated, we timbered in 2000, right when I bought the property. So now if you look at it in 2020, it's like any place that was timbered, A, you could never tell it was timbered. B, if you could go back and look at that land, that forest stand in 2000, it looks way healthier now than it ever did in 2000. Because that selective cut really allowed the canopy to flourish. So silvopasture really fits in well with that and is going to help us, A, open up some land where we could have some cattle in there, but still be producing incredible protein for the pigs if we want to rotate them through.
Very, very interesting. And that's one of the things. I mean, there's so much about your YouTube channel that I really enjoy. But there's not many, there are plenty of people that talk about pigs. Everybody talks about chickens, but there isn't a lot of people that really focus as well and as much as you do on responsible forest management and how that can be a part of a successful homestead. Whether it's from the standpoint of raising funds to be able to support your homestead, selectively cutting to generate silvopasture, or, for the standpoint of, cutting wood for firewood and so forth. And so that's, mm-hmm. I really have learned so much from you in that regard, because I'm somebody who I know an oak I know a maple. I probably could, identify some shagbark hickory, and that's about the extent of it.
Right.
It's just not my thing.
Yeah, yeah, and it is. It's got to be something you're interested in, and there's thousands of other things to be interested in, still be in the genre of homesteading. But the thing I find interesting is this idea that when we looked at the land, it's like, okay, it's covered in trees. If I was out in the Great Plains and I was looking at this huge expanse of grasses, I'd be like, wow, you know what I want to do? I want to do silvopasture here. That wouldn't really fit. I mean, it could be done, but my goodness, the inputs you'd need and the time you'd have to wait I'd really be doing it for my grandkids more than I would for myself.
Right.
So we just kind of had to take the land and say, okay, what's the land going to offer? Well, the land offers all this. So to me, the forestry products, the fact that there's trees standing on our land, they have such incredible value standing there, but they also have value when it's time for them to come down. So that's why I purchased a sawmill and have that on the farm, because as we open up canopy for silvopasture, if it was something where I was going to I'm doing all this by hand, I'm not bringing in heavy equipment because I don't want to tear up the ground that much and have all this open land to deal with erosion issues. But as you do this by hand, I'm like, okay, if I'm going to cut down 6 poplar trees that are millable trees and have some commercial value, there's nobody that's going to come in and get 6 trees from me. If I decide I'm going to load those up and take them to a log yard, well, you're really at the mercy of the log guy. He knows you're not going to turn around and take them back home. He's going to say, all right, I'll give you $40 for those because you didn't cut it right, or you made this mistake or whatever. And you're going to spend more in gas than you are actually getting value out of that. So to me, it's like, well, if I'm going to cut them down, instead of just cutting them up for firewood or burning them, piling them up and burning them, or leaving them in the woods, let's turn them into a product that has additional value. So that's why you see barns on my property, corrals, all those things. Anything that's wood has been made from the trees on our farm.
That's very, very cool. And, I think one of the other things that you mentioned as well that's so important is that everybody's homestead and the land is going to be different. And so you've got to work within the constraints of what you have. And sometimes I think people, they hear the term silvopasture and it's a great concept. But as you said, if you're out in the Midwest, silvopasture is probably, not to say that's not what you shouldn't pursue that, but there's probably other things that you should pursue and other approaches, I guess, that might be better. And I think sometimes homesteaders get fixated on a concept and try to fit their land or their way of homesteading into that concept instead of dealing with or working within the constraints of what they have, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. It's kind of a permaculture process, which I don't consider myself a permaculturalist. I love the concept and I love key points of it. I'd love to know more about it and do more with it. But really, this idea of observation, you can't put a square peg in a round hole. It's like if I decided, which is funny because West Virginia has, if I decided, hey, I've got 100 acres, I want to be a hobby aircraft pilot. I want to build an airstrip on my property. Well, that would be dumb. It would be
right.
be very difficult for me to be able to land a plane on my property safely. So it's just one of those things you look at it and say, well, I can't do this without a lot of inputs, a lot of expense, and a lot of just beating my head against the wall. What can I do?
Mm-hmm.
I was just talking with a guy the other night in one of our Pastured Pig podcasts, and he uses the wagon wheel method in his pasture rotation. It's like, that's awesome. That's what everybody should be doing. I can't do that on my farm. I don't have the opportunity to have a centralized hub because everything in the middle of my land is either a watershed or it's my road to get me from point A to point B. So, we have to use an alleyway method. So it's just one of those things. You look at the land's going to kind of show you what it can do and what it can't do. And you pretty much ought to follow those promptings more than coming in here and saying, if I get enough equipment in here and I burn enough diesel, I burn enough money, I can make this fit, because you're really going to be challenging yourself to do a bunch of things that you could do easier a different way.
Absolutely. And I think that the key, the key thing to keep in mind for people is that there are many many ways to, maybe it's not politically correct to say anymore, but to skin a cat.
Right.
And so there are many good ways to raise pigs on pasture, and you cover that. There are many great ways to raise chickens on pasture, and so to get fixated on so-and-so does it this way, that's how I have to do it, is sometimes, I think, a recipe for failure, not so much a recipe for success.
Yeah.
And one of the, going back to another thing that you said as well, one of the other things that I really appreciate about your YouTube channel is the fact that you are willing to own your failures and that you are willing to talk about them, because I think too many times, especially content creators that are dealing with homesteading, try to put a rosy picture on everything. And homesteading is just as much about learning from what went wrong as it is about learning from what went right.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's the thing. We always joke, if we didn't video our mistakes, we wouldn't have much channel content, because it's one of those things. This property is unique. Our efforts are unique. What we're trying to do won't fit on other farms directly, and I feel, I don't know. I think all of us that decide to put our lives out on any type of social media, whether it's Facebook, whether it's YouTube, whether it's Instagram. I mean, there's always that cliche of, okay, you see the best of people on Facebook, you never see the bad part of people. Kelly and I just feel obligated, if we're going to show stuff that we're doing, then we need to show the bad. And, in full transparency, I don't show necessarily every time I have a horrible day, because nobody wants to see Troy lose his mind. But it's just one of those things to say, okay, we tried this, it didn't work.
Mm-hmm.
Because we feel that if somebody can learn from our mistake and say, hey, avoid this process because it didn't work, and maybe it will work for you, but it didn't work for us because of these reasons. Mm-hmm. And I mean, when you show mistakes, you get a lot of heat, and anybody that has a YouTube channel knows you got to have thick skin. I mean,
big time.
I have people give me a hard time about how I use a chainsaw, or how I don't do this, or how I can't believe you did that. Why didn't you do it this way? So it is what it is. And, I try to respond to those things, as long as they're not being completely belligerent and being abusive. Then I usually respond and say, well, here was my thinking behind that. But then also it gives opportunity for feedback. I've had multiple people respond and say, hey, you ever considered that? It's like, that's a great idea. And we've altered our plans just because of viewer comments, and it's like, that's a good idea. I'd be an idiot to say, no, I got this taken care of, when somebody has some good advice they're going to offer. So.
Right. It kind of goes back to, you got to, eat the meat and throw away the bones kind of thing. One of the other things that I found with regards to responding to some of those people is, hey, why don't you go ahead and shoot some content and show me how to do it?
Exactly.
Why don't you put some stuff out there? Exactly. I'd be more than happy to watch it.
Well, and there's just one more point to that real quick, Brian. There was one, and I guess this one's still stuck in my craw, I guess subconsciously, but so we did a video where I had a tree leaning out over my road, and it's a dangerous situation. Anytime you're in the woods cutting down, multiple 1,000-pound items that are going to fall out of the sky, then there's always risk, of course. And I'm 47 years old. I've been running a chainsaw since I was a teenager, and I obviously still make mistakes. I still have, I don't have a scar on my body from a chainsaw, fortunately, and good thanks to the Lord. So
I'll knock on wood over here for you too.
Yeah, please do. I don't have any wood in my truck. But so it's one of those things to say, okay, well, I don't consider myself an expert, but I'm not a neophyte in the woods with a chainsaw either. But my goodness, it's like, there's certain things that you do on YouTube, and it just brings everybody out. It's like, oh my goodness, and you weren't doing this, you weren't standing here right, you didn't do that right, and one guy was so adamant. He's like, you need to delete all your videos where you're using a chainsaw, because you're going to get somebody killed if they follow any of your advice, and blah 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 blah. So it's like, well, man, that's your opinion. Yeah, I'd like to think that there is something somebody can glean from this. Maybe it is, hey, don't stand like Troy did, because he almost got himself killed. But we haven't had those type of situations yet, knock on wood. So.
Mm-hmm. And you're absolutely right. I think sometimes the best way, people say the best way to learn is from your mistakes, and I say no, no, no. The best way to learn is from other people's mistakes. So,
Right, exactly.
thanks, Troy. I've learned a lot.
Yeah,
No, I'm just kidding.
yeah, exactly. Yeah,
Uh,
you save a
but
lot of money and a lot of blood. Yeah.
right. Um, so you have kind of circling back a little bit to the pigs. You recently switched kind of the breed that you were raising on your farm, correct? Was it about a
Yeah,
year ago?
yeah. Actually, it was a year ago, almost to the date. Yeah, and the reasoning behind that. So the multiple years before that, I had I really just had mutts, production mutts. I had Hampshire Duroc mix. The Hampshire is what I purchased from a local farm. Didn't know anything about them. It was literally one of those things where we decide one day to get pigs. We go get them that afternoon, and I didn't even have any fences set up yet. So that's, again, don't do that. Don't ever do that.
Yeah.
But that's what we did, and so we had some just you know West Virginia farm mutts, and so I started introducing Duroc to them because I wanted that growth. I'm thinking production. I'm thinking meat on my plate, and not thinking nearly as much about the bigger picture of, okay, how are they going to handle this land? These are production. These are confinement bred pigs more so than pastured pigs. And so over time, as I learned more about them, realizing, okay, yeah, these guys are pretty tough on my land, and especially with steep slope, bare ground in West Virginia always has erosion potential, and it's really tough to mitigate, especially when you get in the winter months, when you have a lot of open ground. So over the years, I realized, okay, these guys, these pigs are not as gentle on the pasture as maybe a heritage, more of a pasture-based breed would be. And I was really getting, I didn't like where my genetics were going because I was getting more miscarriages, more issues of farrowing. I think just that mutt production breed issues were just showing up, mothering instincts being lost, those type of things. So we had a specifically tragic year. We had our last pig had nine, farrowed nine, and crushed all of them, which she had a great history of mothering, hadn't had issues like that before. And that was to us kind of the last straw. So we decided, hey, we're going to retire all of our genetics that we have here. And we purchased pigs from a farm in South Carolina, Six Oaks Farms, David Crafton, and they are large black Tamworth mix. So they have a good mixture of heritage, but they still finish pretty well. 7 to 8 months, we're still getting a market-sized pig. And we raise our pigs not just for our own consumption, but for resale in our area. So we purchased weaners from him. So pigs that we were going to finish, and then we pulled out breeding stock from that. So we've already raised our first sounder of pigs that we had. We raised them and produced that and had those processed. We kept 2 of the gilts. Those 2 were bred with the boars that we got, and we've already had that first litter. We bred a little early. It was if you watch the channel, you'll see the reason. My mistake. I just didn't get them separated fast enough. So they were bred a little sooner than I wanted to. But good litters, good mothering instincts. We only had 1 loss out of the 2 litters. And so I like what I'm seeing so far, and not nearly as destructive on the pasture. They still uprooted, but it's not, I'm not looking at foxholes that I can dive into like I was with the old pigs. So it's been a good change so far.
Nice. And again, that kind of goes back to the whole idea of a journey and kind of learning as you go and understanding. When you first get into something, I don't care what it is. I think some people have in their minds, if I do all of this book learning, I'm not going to make any mistakes. Everything's going to go perfectly according to plan. And that's just not reality, and certainly not reality on a homestead. And so in your case, again, it's one of those things where you've kind of learned on the fly, you've developed skills, and your journey has kind of led you to where you are today.
Yeah. And like you said, that has a lot of hard lessons, and that's where yeah, I get heat. Again, there's people that don't understand how farms work, but B,
Yes.
they don't want to see somebody fail at the expense of an animal's life, and I don't
Right.
want to see that either. Yeah, it kind of blows my mind. People think, "Oh, you're an idiot. I can't believe you killed your pig." Well, I didn't do it intentionally. So
Right.
one situation was we had third generation gilt that never had a good heat cycle. So we went a full year and she never had a good heat cycle. I should have retired her, but I really liked her conformation. She was bred out of this mother that had great production. It's like, man, I really want to get some piglets out of her. And, just kind of ignored the warning signs, no good heat cycle. You really hadn't shown any opportunity for breeding there. But just so happened as the process aligned, I had some AI components in for another sow that I was breeding. She actually happened to stand. I'm like, oh, wow, cool. I'm going to get a couple doses in her. Did. So she, she settled and her pregnancy looked good. Man, she went a week early and just had the most violent farrowing I had ever seen. I had to go in and pull pigs,
Mm.
and she didn't make it. And she killed all but 3 of her piglets. And I didn't do a necropsy necropsy. Oh my goodness, I can't talk. I didn't do an autopsy, let's say. But she died later, like 2 days later, and I tried to do antibiotics, tried to do all these things to save her. And man, there is nothing more heartbreaking than going out in the pasture and standing over a dead animal that, I'm 100% responsible for. I killed that animal because I tried to breed her, thinking that she could produce, and she didn't, and it cost the life of her and most of her piglets. And it's heartbreaking, and it's one of those things. It really sucks, but that's part of it. So now I've learned, and I shared that on our videos. Like, okay, here's why this didn't work. So here's what I've learned from it. So maybe somebody can glean something from it as well.
Absolutely. And I remember the first time we had a loss on our farm of an animal where I kind of felt directly responsible. It was, and to a certain extent, it wasn't necessarily in the same vein as you, but we had a pig that I went out one day and it was kind of stiff, and long story short, it seems like it had tetanus, had to have it put down. And that was one of the worst days of my life.
Yeah.
And I really struggled with it. And then there's a friend of mine who was a retired dairy farmer. His name's Dave. And I've quoted him many times since on the podcast, but he said to me, Brian, when you have livestock, eventually you're going to have dead stock.
Right. Yeah.
And I know that sounds harsh, but, and to people who aren't around a farm and don't understand any of this, it certainly does sound very harsh, but it's just the reality of it. And I really think that, letting people know that is important. Not that you want to dwell on it and be macabre, I guess. But again, it kind of goes back to just being real and honest about, we're trying to be responsible in raising our animals. We're trying to do the best we can. But sometimes things go wrong. And, sometimes it's because we did something wrong. And sometimes it's because Mother Nature intervenes. Sometimes it's bad genetics. And that's one of the things that for me, and I raise American guinea hogs. I do not intervene when it comes to farrowing. And some people will see that as being very, very harsh. But for me, I look at it from the standpoint of I want to have pigs on my farm that are rugged and that have that I'm not perpetuating, I guess, weakness in my bloodlines, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I know some people will find that very, very harsh, but it's part of what we're trying to do with the American guinea hog breed, is to have a breed that has got great mothering instincts and so on and so forth. And sometimes you have to make those difficult decisions, and sometimes we don't always get them right.
Yeah. There's a spectrum there. I think when I think of like permaculture and annual type stuff or perennial type stuff, you think of the stun method, the sheer total utter neglect, and that's where you you just kind of let it go, and if it survives, it survives. Now, I wouldn't recommend that with a farm animal, but you think about that extreme on one end of the spectrum, all the way over to a complete confinement system to where you have full control over the environment. You have no predator issue, disease you're taken care of through all kinds of pharmaceuticals and those type of things. So, somewhere in between there is where we like to reside and say, well, I'm not going to totally neglect this animal, but I'm also not going to lock it in a barn and shoot it up with a bunch of stuff.
Right.
So anytime you're in between that spectrum, then you still have the opportunity for loss. You still have the opportunity for things to go sideways. I mean, there's a reason why people like chicken. Everything likes chicken. So foxes, coyotes, raccoons, everybody wants to eat chicken. So chickens are going to get eaten.
Absolutely. And I like chicken too. So,
Exactly. Right.
So what's kind of next for Red ToolHouse? What's next for the homestead? You had mentioned cattle. Is that your next thing, or kind of where do you see yourself going?
Well, yeah, I'd like to think as a business owner that I sit down and try to do these business models, and I help consult people with business and marketing and those things, but sometimes I don't apply what I teach to my own situation. But short-term goals would be just expanded pasture, more silvopasture. We're finally working out a situation with our chickens where we're going to have them mobilized and start rotating them through our pastures to help break down the pest cycles. The be able to follow behind the pigs and do that. So we're building a mobile coop, and it's funny. We spend a lot of time. We're not far from Joel Salatin's place, so we spend a lot of time over there. And you look at his setups, like, wow, that's what I want to do. But then you realize, okay, the Shenandoah Valley is so unique. There's no way I could do that on my farm because I don't have the land that he has, the lay of the land. But some of those principles carry over, so that's what we're trying to do there. So short term, just getting better there. Long term, cattle will definitely be that. So as we open up more land, we're looking at highland cattle. We think we're far enough north that we can handle that. We like them. They're just so darn.
They're beautiful.
They're beautiful. They're fun to be around. When we were in Maine last year, we got to spend some time on a highland farm and really got to interact with them. Extremely tasty, of course, but really like their browse. Yeah, they browse. They can handle a lot more roughage than most of the production cattle out there.
Right.
So the farm we were on, it's like, wow, look at the tree line. Those cattle have eaten that tree line down. That's what we need because we don't have pristine pasture. We have some roughage. So looking at that, and then probably the biggest thing, and I won't spend a lot of time on this because it doesn't necessarily fit directly into homesteading, is we are in the center of our property. We're building what we're calling the retreat, which would be an off-grid something. It's going to maybe have a bath shower facility. It's going to have a small cabin. It's going to have tent sites. It's going to have a picnic shelter. And its original intent, or its main intent, is to be something for married couples in our area, in our network here, to be able to come out to use. We're totally off grid. You can't get cell service. There's no phone service. There's nothing. I mean, you are in the dark when you come out to our place. So out to this spot on our place. So we want to invite, first start with the friends and married people in our church to say, hey, if you need a break, we're only 30 minutes from the capital city of our state. So in 30 minutes, you can be out in the middle of nowhere, come stay the weekend, be off grid, put the phones down, and work on your marriage, whatever that looks like, whether it's conversations, whether it's walks through the woods, whether it's maybe intimacy that you don't get to have because you've got 16 screaming kids, whatever it may be. We want to do that. Kelly and I feel led to just try to facilitate that opportunity. So you'll see it on the channel. We've talked about it. We'll probably start building things hopefully this year when the weather breaks. And to me, that's almost my swan song, is could I have something in the center of this property that can not just serve me and my family, but serve others and still kind of fit the theme of the whole property.
That's awesome, man. That's amazing. That sounds like just a really, really great thing. And so best of luck with that. And I hope that people will avail themselves of it because that's huge. And I quite frankly, I see that as fitting very well within homesteading, but You know,
Let's
maybe
go.
some people might say we're wacky.
Yeah. I mean, my own, there's obviously selfish motives behind everything. And I'm just excited to learn these things. I love milling lumber and turning it into something. So, yeah, I'm thinking of, 40 different ways I want to try to build a little off-grid cabin. And I can see myself, because of COVID, it's changed my entire business structure. So I don't have to leave the farm very much, but I can see myself going back there, 2 or 3 days and say, hey, if y'all want to hang out on the front of the property, go for it. I'm going to go back and spend a couple of days in solitude. Maybe take my Bible, take a book, do something, go back there and just spend some quality time, just unplug from everything. So that I love the idea of that. And so, there is some selfish motives there, but just the idea of learning all this stuff. We've got a small tract of land up in the mountains that we're doing an off-grid setup, and we featured that on our channel as well. We're using vermicomposting toilets, little outdoor shower, those type of things. And that to me is just something else to learn. And I'm just excited to be able to dive into it and make a ton of mistakes and figure it out as we go.
Excellent. Well, Troy, thank you so much for taking time to join me here on the Homestead Journey. I really appreciate it. I enjoy your channel so much, and just a big part of it is just the fact that you're real, you're authentic. Kelly sure puts up with a lot, but I love the interaction between you two. It's just something that's very, very inspiring. And I really appreciate you coming on here. So as we kind of wrap up here, why don't you let everybody know where they can find you?
Yeah, so I appreciate that, man. Yeah, and one real point quick about Kelly. Kelly, you're right. Kelly is a trooper. She lives in a continuous state of fear as to what's about to come out of my mouth next. Is always her concern. So, but yeah, if people want to find more out about us, they can check out redtoolhouse.com as our website, and that has connections to our podcast, connections to our channel, to our blog. You kind of figure out what's going on there. We're Facebook, Red ToolHouse Homestead, and Instagram, Red ToolHouse, I believe. But you can go to the website and that'll point you to everything.
Well, excellent. Thank you so much.
Hey, man, I appreciate it. Enjoyed the conversation. Look forward to talking to you again some point.
Well, folks, I hope you really enjoyed that. I hope you found it informational, inspirational. And Troy, thanks once again, for joining me here on the podcast. It really was so much fun, and I really, really appreciated it. If you enjoyed this podcast and you have any kind of questions, you can reach out to me, Brian, at thehomesteadjourney.net, and I would be glad to answer any questions you have. You can also reach us on all of our social media accounts. The links are in the show notes. I will also link to all of Troy's accounts as well in the show notes. So if you want to reach out to him directly, feel free to do so. Troy is just an absolute wealth of knowledge. And once again, I just really, really appreciate him taking the time to chat with us here on the Homestead Journey podcast. The music on this podcast, as always, was provided by audionautics.com. And until next time, everybody, keep up the good work.